What if John F. Kennedy had not been assassinated? The assassination of John F. Kennedy on November 22, 1963, changed the course of history, leaving countless what-if scenarios in its wake. What would the world have looked like if Kennedy had survived? Here are 10 scandalous, shocking, and fascinating possibilities, split into 2 scenarios: a darker path of turmoil and a brighter, optimistic future. Number 1. The Third World War unleashed? John F. Kennedy's tenure as president was defined by high-stakes brinkmanship, especially during the Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962. The world stood on the precipice of nuclear annihilation as the US and Soviet Union faced off over the placement of Soviet missiles in Cuba. Kennedy's firm but calculated decision to impose a naval blockade and demand missile removal showcased his willingness to push back against Nikita Khrushchev. However, it was also a gamble. General Curtis LeMay, among others, advocated for immediate military strikes, which could have triggered Soviet retaliation. Had Kennedy survived and continued his aggressive Cold War policies, tensions might have escalated further. Kennedy supported the placement of U.S. Jupiter missiles in Turkey, a provocative move against the USSR. A miscalculation during these high-stakes exchanges could have sparked a nuclear conflict. Historians like Arthur Schlesinger Jr. note that Kennedy privately expressed concern about the destructive potential of nuclear war, stating, "If we do act, we do so at the risk of starting something that no man can stop." Yet his strong anti-communist stance suggests he might have taken further risks to maintain U.S. dominance. Could his survival have pushed the superpowers to the brink of World War III? The world avoided catastrophe in 1962, but Kennedy's continuation of Cold War brinkmanship leaves this question open to debate. Number 2. The Vietnam quagmire grows deeper. Kennedy's foreign policy was deeply rooted in the containment of communism, and Vietnam became a critical front in this ideological battle. By 1963, Kennedy had increased the number of U.S. military advisors in South Vietnam from 900 to over 16,000, signaling his commitment to supporting the regime of No Dinh Diem against the Viet Cong insurgency. Publicly, Kennedy maintained a firm stance, declaring in his inaugural address, "Let every nation know that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, to assure the survival and success of liberty." Privately, however, Kennedy expressed doubts about the viability of U.S. involvement. In interviews with journalist Arthur Kroc, Kennedy hinted that he might not escalate the conflict further, stating, "It's their war to win or lose." Nonetheless, the pressure to avoid being seen as soft on communism could have driven him toward deeper engagement. Had Kennedy survived, some analysts argue that troop numbers might have surged to over 300,000 by the mid-1960s, doubling the eventual U.S. casualties. The war, which cost over 58,000 American lives under Johnson, might have become an even greater quagmire under Kennedy's leadership, prolonging the suffering in Vietnam and intensifying domestic opposition. Number 3. Scandal: the Marilyn Monroe affair and a secret love child? The alleged affair between John F. Kennedy and Marilyn Monroe remains one of the most talked about rumors in U.S. political history. Monroe's iconic performance of Happy Birthday, Mr. President in May 1962 only fueled speculation about their relationship. After Monroe's sudden death on August 5, 1962, rumors intensified, with some suggesting their connection went deeper than previously thought. Had Kennedy survived, revelations of their affair might have emerged, along with claims of a secret child. Several accounts suggest Monroe privately hinted at a pregnancy in early 1962, with Kennedy as a possible father. A love child would have sparked a media storm, threatening Kennedy's presidency and his Camelot image. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, known for collecting damaging information on politicians, could have used this to undermine Kennedy's power. Such a scandal would have overshadowed Kennedy's achievements and likely derailed his re-election campaign. Historian Donald Spoto called Monroe's ties to the Kennedys a dangerous entanglement, hinting at the explosive consequences such a revelation might have had. Could Kennedy's charisma have weathered such a storm, or would this have been his ultimate downfall? Number 4. A more divided America. The civil rights movement was reaching a boiling point during Kennedy's presidency, and his cautious approach to racial integration drew criticism from both sides. While Kennedy supported limited measures, such as deploying federal troops to integrate the University of Mississippi in 1962, he hesitated to push comprehensive civil rights legislation. Activists like Martin Luther King Jr. praised his symbolic gestures but demanded stronger action, while segregationists in the South viewed him as a threat to their way of life. Had Kennedy survived, his gradual approach might have further inflamed racial tensions. Southern resistance, epitomized by George Wallace's infamous declaration of segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever, might have escalated into violent confrontations. Kennedy's federal interventions could have polarized the electorate, making him a divisive figure. The Democratic Party's traditional base in the South might have fractured earlier than it did under Johnson, altering the political landscape of the 1960s and beyond. Number 5. Economic turmoil, a failed tax policy? Kennedy's economic policies aimed to balance growth with fiscal responsibility, but they were not without risks. His 1963 proposal for significant tax cuts sought to reduce the top income tax rate from 91% to 65% and the corporate tax rate from 52% to 47%. While these measures were designed to stimulate investment and job creation, critics feared they could balloon the federal deficit. Economists like Paul Samuelson warned that without spending cuts, the deficit could spiral out of control, undermining confidence in U.S. financial stability. If Kennedy's policies had led to economic turmoil during a second term, the resulting unemployment and inflation could have sparked widespread discontent. Such a scenario might have tarnished Kennedy's legacy, painting him as a leader whose ambition exceeded his grasp. Number 6. The peaceful dissolution of the USSR. Kennedy's adept handling of the Cuban Missile Crisis hinted at his potential for de-escalating Cold War tensions. Through private back-channels, including letters exchanged with Khrushchev, Kennedy demonstrated a willingness to seek peaceful resolutions. Imagine a scenario where Kennedy's second term included a landmark arms reduction treaty, paving the way for the eventual dissolution of the Soviet Union. Such diplomacy might have prevented the costly arms race of the 1980s, freeing resources for economic development. Khrushchev himself once remarked, "Kennedy is an intelligent man. He sees the future." Could their cooperation have reshaped global geopolitics decades earlier? Kennedy's blend of pragmatism and charisma leaves this as an intriguing possibility. Number 7. Civil rights victory under Kennedy. In June 1963, Kennedy delivered a groundbreaking address, calling civil rights a moral issue as old as the scriptures and as clear as the Constitution. His proposal for sweeping civil rights legislation marked a significant shift in his presidency. Had he lived, Kennedy might have used his political capital to pass the Civil Rights Act himself, bypassing the bloody struggles that occurred under Johnson. Kennedy's ability to inspire could have accelerated societal change, fostering greater unity by the 1970s. His survival might have reshaped America's racial landscape, achieving equality more swiftly and avoiding some of the violence that marred the movement. Number 8. A Man on Mars by 1980? Kennedy's commitment to space exploration was unmatched. His famous words at Rice University, "We choose to go to the moon, not because it is easy, but because it is hard," embodied his visionary leadership. Under his sustained advocacy, NASA's budget soared, enabling the Apollo program to achieve the moon landing in 1969. With Kennedy's continued support, projects like Mars exploration might have gained traction. Proposals for manned Mars missions, presented by NASA in the late 1960s, could have materialized by 1980, solidifying U.S. supremacy in space. Kennedy's leadership might have transformed the space race into a long-term journey of discovery. Number 9. A global shift in trade relations. The Trade Expansion Act of 1962 was a bold step toward globalization, granting Kennedy the authority to negotiate tariff reductions. His survival could have ushered in a new era of international economic cooperation, fostering trade agreements that elevated developing nations. Kennedy's vision might have laid the foundation for organizations like the World Trade Organization, shaping global commerce in ways that reduced poverty and spurred growth. Number 10. A lasting legacy of peace. Kennedy's charisma and progressive policies set him apart as a leader with global influence. A second term might have solidified his legacy as a champion of peace and prosperity, inspiring democratic reforms worldwide. His emphasis on diplomacy and cooperation could have prevented conflicts like the Vietnam War, leaving a lasting impact on international relations. Kennedy's vision for a better future remains one of history's great what-ifs.